In this video, I want to show you how to create a single-page application without framework. So here is application that we will implement. As you can see, it's a to-do list where we can type the name of the new to-do and it will be added to our list. Additionally, we can toggle this to-do to mark it as completed. We can also filter our to-dos on the bottom, and we see the amount of to-dos inside footer which are left to be completed. Additionally to that, we can remove a to-do or edit a to-do. So with double click on our to-do, we're in editing mode, we can change a to-do, and with enter it will be updated. This is exactly the goal of this video. And we will implement everything without any frameworks at all, with just plain JavaScript. And as you can see here, I already prepared for us a basic markup. So I generated a project by using Vite. It is mostly an empty project. Inside our body, we have just a full markup of our project. As you can see here inside section to do app, with some styling, we have our header with an input and h1. We have our main part with toggle all and the empty list. And we also have our footer with the amount of items and our filters. And here we are loading our file main.js. As you can see, main.js file is completely empty. And additionally, inside index.html, I included two CSS files, base CSS and index CSS. And here are these two files. And you can find all these source codes in the description under the video. So the first thing that I want to do is to create a new folder inside root, and let's name it todo MVC. This is exactly the project where all our files will be situated. And the first file is here index.js. This is where all our logic will be written. And additionally, I want to create here helpers.js, where we will write lots of helpers which will work with our to-dos. And in order for this to work inside our main, we want to import our file from todo MVC. Now, in order to test that, let's just write console log todo inside our index.js. As you can see in browser, we are getting a console log todo, which means we successfully loaded this JavaScript file. There are different ways to structure your JavaScript application. And here I want to structure it just with functions without any classes at all. And just to remind you, in plain JavaScript, all functions that you will create here will go directly inside window and pollute global namespace. So here we can't create some function because essentially it would be global. You will have this problem if you are just using plain HTML files and JavaScript. But here I generated our project by using Vite, and this means that every single file here is a module, and this some function will never get to our global namespace. So here I can't call some function because it is not there, it is isolated, which actually means we can safely create all functions just directly here inside index.js, and they are already isolated by default. And the first thing that I want to do is create a function which will initialize the whole to-do project. So here let's create a function, initialize, and all logic which must happen on initialize will be written here. And the first thing that we need to do, we want to find all our DOM elements that we have on the page. Here we can inspect all of them, like new to-do or header or to-do app or main, footer. We need to access all of them. And it doesn't make any sense to query them every single time. It makes sense to query all these elements just from the beginning and then reuse them across the whole application. This is why here I want to call a function findElements, and it will prepare for us all elements and find them. This is why here let's create a findElements function which must find for us all our DOM nodes. But how can we structure them? I want to store them in additional property, for example, selectors, and we can just create this property here on the top. So let's create a variable selectors, and this is an object. And here what we can do now, we can write selectors equals, and here, for example, as a key, we can write new to do. It will be our input where we can type the name, which essentially means here we can write document query selector, and here is our class new to do. So let's have a look what is inside our selectors. But in order for this code to work, we must call initialize, because we didn't call it at all. This is why I will just call our function initialize and reload the page. As you can see here, we're getting an object with key new to do, and this is the reference to this specific DOM node, which essentially means here in this object we can store all our DOM nodes and then reuse them across the whole application. So here we can find, for example, a to-do list, also by using document query selector, and here will be class to-do list. Again, all these classes are already inside HTML. Then we need our footer, which is also document query selector with class footer. Then we have our main part, which is document query selector, main. Then toggle all button, which is inside our main. So again, document query selector. Here is class toggle all. Then we have here a counter, so count. It will be query selector for our to-do count class. And the last one here will be filters, which is document query selector, and it is a parent class of all our filters. I'm sorry for interruption, but I just want to let you know that I have lots of advanced courses on different web technologies where we create real applications and prepare for the interviews. You can find the link in the description box below. Now let's jump back into the video. Let's have a look. I'm reloading the page, and as you can see here, we're getting all DOM nodes that we're using inside our application. The next thing that we need to do is to create a function render. And essentially this function will re-render the whole application based on our state, which actually means we will change, for example, a list of our to-dos or a filter when we clicked on some item, for example, or we created a new to-do. It will simply re-render the whole application without thinking which part we must re-render. It really simplifies the process of rendering a lot. So here let's create a render function. And on initialize, after we found all our elements, we want to call this render function. But in order to apply some logic, we must create our state. So the question is, what data do we have inside our application? First of all, we have a list of our to-dos. This is why here on the top, let's create a to-dos which is just an array. And then later we will change this array. And also here we have a filter, and by default it is all. So what is filter? This is a filter on the bottom which we can activate, and it can be either all, active or completed. Now the main goal when we're writing code inside our render, it should not think about when we're calling it, which actually means it must cover the whole application. For example, we must hide main part and footer part if we don't have any to-dos. As you can see, footer is not hidden, but main is not visible. So in order to hide our footer, we can write selectors.footer, and we're accessing this DOM node that we already prepared, .style.display, because we want to change it between display block and display none. And here we're checking if our to-do's length bigger than 0, then it should be block. In other case, it should be none. Which actually means every single time when we're calling a render function, it is checking based on our state, so on our to-dos, how our footer must look like. And exactly the same stuff we must do for our main part. So selectors main, style display, and here we're checking if it is empty, then we're hiding it. Let's check this out. I'm reloading the page. We don't see main and footer because by default they must be hidden. The next thing that we want to do is attach some listeners to our DOM nodes. For example, when we're typing something here in the input and we're hitting enter, we must create a new to-do. How can we do that? So after we found all our elements, we can attach some listeners to them. This is why here let's create a function add listeners. And now we must create this function. So what we want to do here is to create a key-up event for our input. So we can write here selectors.newToDo, this is our input, add event listener, and here we want to handle a key-up event, and we're getting access to this event here, and we can apply some logic. So what we want to check here is that we hit enter. This is why here if our event.key equals enter, so we hit enter. Then we want to console log, for example, submit. And here I want to see what do we have inside event target value, which actually means this is the value inside our input. Let's have a look. I'm reloading the page, typing something here. I'm hitting enter and we're getting submit DDD, which actually means we successfully binded this event key up to our input and we wrote here our console log. Now we can implement creating of the new to-do, because here we got the name of our to-do, we can call a function add to-do and provide inside event target value, so the text from the input. Now here on the bottom, let's create a new function add to-do, and we know that we are getting inside text. So how we can create a new to-do? First of all, we need a unique ID. Let's create here a new to-do, which is an object, and it has 3 fields. First of all, text, secondly is completed, and a unique ID. So in order to generate a unique ID in browser, we can use crypto.randomuid. It will generate for us a unique ID. Now here we are providing text from the outside, and is completed by default is false. What are we doing with this new to-do? We want to update our to-dos array. We can write here todos.push and we're throwing inside new to-do, but I don't recommend you such approach. Why not? Because I prefer all my code to be immutable. Yes, it is more difficult to write immutable code, but you are always sure that you are not mutating data that you should not. This is why instead of this code I prefer to write todos equals, and here we're creating a new array where we're spreading all our existing to-dos and we're adding at the end new to-do. The result will be exactly the same, but we're reassigning the completely new array. So what I want to do after this function, I want to console log the to-dos array. Let's type something, hit enter, and as you can see, this is our new object. Inside an array we're getting an ID, text, and is completed. But here is a problem. Our index.js will be extremely big because we are writing all our logic here. What I want to do, I want to move all logic regarding working with our state inside helpers, because essentially this add to do does not belong here. Because what it does, it changes our state. This is why this logic I want to put inside our helpers. I'm just moving the whole function here, and I will write here export const add to do so we can use it outside. But here is the problem. As you can see, in this file we don't have access to to-dos. This is why additionally inside our add to do we must provide an array that we want to update. And what I want to do here is return a new array. So the idea is that our add to do function gets an array of existing to-dos and text, and it returns the completely new array of to-dos without mutating the existing one. Now here inside our index.js on the top, we can import all our helpers, and we can do that by import star as helpers from helpers, which actually means now we're getting helpers, which is an object with every single function. And for example, here, as you can see, we still are calling add to do, which is completely fine because we need add to do function here inside this file. Let's have a look. Here is our add to do function, and we're providing text inside. What I want to write here is todos equals, and here we're calling our helpers.add to do, and inside we're providing our todos array and text. Most importantly, this single liner updates a list of our to-dos, and our index.js doesn't really know how this add to do function is implemented. So what are we doing after creating a new to-do? We must call render. Why that? Because we changed our state, we need to re-render the whole application. But here is a problem, our render function does not do anything yet with our to-dos. And what it must do, it must remove from the screen all our existing to-dos and then take our to-do state and recreate every single to-do. In this case, we are sure that we are rendering all information that we need. This is why first of all I want to empty completely our list of to-dos. So selectors to-do list dot in HTML, and I want to assign here an empty string. Now for every single to-do that we have inside array, we want to create a new DOM node. This is why here we can get our list of to-dos and we're calling for each and we're getting access to every single to-do. And here we want to create a to-do node. And in order to create our node, we want to use an additional function to separate our logic. So let's create here create to-do node, where inside we're providing to-do to create. In this case, our render function doesn't really know how we're creating a to-do, we're doing it in separate function. So let's create here create to-do node and we're getting our to-do inside. And after this to-do node is created, we want to append it to the list. So our selectors dot to-do list dot append child, and we're appending our to-do node that we just created. Now the question is how to create our to-do node. And our node is a lead. This is why here let's create our node, which is a document, create element, and it is a lead. Most importantly, you should remember that we're not just creating here new to-dos, we must cover all possible states. Like for example, that our to-do is completed, and then we must highlight this toggle button. So here let's check if our to-do dot is completed isn't true, then we want to add here a class completed. So it will be node class list dot add, and here we're adding completed class. After this, I want to paste such markup. So node.inHTML, and we're throwing inside HTML of this node this whole markup. And this is a markup of a single li. So inside li we have a div with class view, with this input, the label, which is our to-do text, and the button to remove. And after this we have also an input with class edit, where inside we provided a value, to-do text. This we need later for our editing. And additionally to that, here inside our input class toggle, we're checking if to-do is completed, then we attach here check string, in other case it's an empty string. The last thing that we need to do here is to return our node, because this is exactly what we're using in order to append it to the list. Let's check if it's working. I'm reloading the page, I'm typing something here and I'm hitting enter. And as you can see, our node was created and our main and footer are visible because we have a to-do inside an array. Let's inspect our li. This is exactly what we created. So this is our whole DOM node with div class view, input class toggle type checkbox. This is our checkbox. As by default we have is completed false, it is not checked. Now here is our label with text. Here is button destroy on the right, we see it on long hover. And after this invisible we have input with class edit and value. This is for editing, which actually means this function creates for us any to-do node that we want, and we can create any amount of to-do nodes. Here I can type anything that I want, and we're creating more and more elements. But here we can do a small improvement. It would be nice to clear this input after we hit enter. This is why here let's scroll to our part where we have key up event, and after our add to do, we want to just take our selector's new to do and set its value to an empty string. Now if we type something and hit enter, we have an empty input. The next thing that I want to implement is this counter. As you can see, we still render 0 items left because our render function did not re-render this counter. Let's do this now. We want to go to our render function, and first of all we need to know how many items for us are still active. So let's find here our active to-dos count. And we need to take all our to-dos and filter them to get access to every single to-do and check that our to-do is not completed. After this we just take length, and this is how we are getting our active to-dos count. I'm sorry for interruption, but I just wanted to let you know that only 20% of the people who watch my videos are subscribed to the channel. If you really want to continue getting videos and support my channel, consider subscribing. It helps a lot. Now let's jump back into the video. What we want to do now, we want to re-render the whole part with the counter on the bottom. So here we can write selectors count.inHTML, and we're assigning here a string. First of all, here we have a strong tag, and inside we're rendering our active to-dos count that we created on the top, then space. And here we want to render either word items or item, depending how many items we have. So here we can check if active to-do count equals 1, then here we're rendering a word item. In other case we're rendering items. And after it we're rendering word left. So these 3 lines will replace completely our counter. Let's have a look. I'm typing something here, hitting enter, we're getting 2 item left because we have just a single to-do. Once again, we are getting 2 items left, which actually means our footer is re-rendered. The next feature that we want to implement is these filters and clicking on them. So we already got inside our selectors filters, but we didn't do anything with them. And what we want to do is to implement additional handler click on these items. This is why here we can do selectors dot filters, this is our parent, dot query selector all, because we want to find all children, and here we're looking for Lee, because inside filters we have 3 Lees. And here we're calling for each, because for every single Lee we want to add an event listener. So here will be Lee.add event listener, and here we're adding a click event, and we want to assign inside our filter a filter on which we clicked. So here we can write filter equals Lee.getAttribute filter. And as you can see here inside index.html, we have our Lees with the filter attribute, and we're reading it from the element on which we clicked, which actually means we're clicking on the Lee and we're checking with getAttribute what is this, and we're reassigning our filter. And after this we must call render because we're changing the state. And just for debugging purposes, let's look on our filter if we're getting it correctly. I'm typing something here so we see filter, I'm clicking on active, and as you can see in the console we're getting active filter. And the whole application is re-rendered, but this active is not highlighted. Why not? Because we never wrote the logic to highlight correctly a filter. So in order to do that, we must do 2 different things. First of all, we must remove a selected class from any of our filters and then add a new class. So in order to do that, we can use selector filters dot query selector all, because we want to get access to all our A links, and we have this class inside our A, and now we're looping and getting access to every single A link, and we want to remove this class, so class list remove selected. So these 3 lines must remove first selected class. Let's try this out. I'm typing something. Here they are removed because we called render. But what we want to do after this, we want to highlight correct filter. So we can write here selectors dot filters dot query selector, because we're looking just for one of them. And here inside we're writing finding by attribute, and we want to check that filter equals, and here will be our filter state, and here space A, which actually means we are getting our A element, and we can add a class now, so class list add, and here will be selected. Let's reload the page, type something here, and all is selected. I'm clicking on active, and now active is selected. So this part of query selector finds an element by an attribute filter, and then we're getting a child element A. But here is the problem. As you can see in browser, even when we click completed, we still see our element. This is wrong because this element is not completed, and we're not filtering our to-dos at all based on our active filter. We must do that. This is why here on the top I want to create a new function, get filtered to-dos. And what it must do, it must filter our to-dos by filter. This is why here let's check if our filter equals active, then we want to return here only active to-dos. So to-dos filter, we're getting every single to-do, and we're checking that it should not be completed, so not is completed. Another case here will be for completed, so filter equals completed. And now inside we will have the whole logic with to-dos filter, but instead we're writing to-do is completed. And in else case we just return all our to-dos. So this function is completely fine. Now we must use it here inside render. So instead of to-dos, we're just calling here get filtered to-dos, which actually means we're getting a list of to-dos that we're rendering based on the filter. Let's check this. I'm reloading the page, I'm typing something here, and I'm clicking on completed. As you can see, we still have 2 items left in the footer, but we don't see any items because they are filtered out. We're clicking on the active, these items are here, we're clicking on all, and they are also here. The next thing that we need to implement is removing of our to-do, but we didn't create a handler for this button. This is why we must go to our function create to-do node, and after we created this node, we must add here an event listener. So we can write here node.querySelector, and we're trying to find an element destroy, because this is exactly our destroy button that we created. And here we want to add our event listener click, and here I want to call a function remove to-do, and we must provide here to-do ID, because this is our unique identifier how we are removing our to-do. Now here on the bottom, let's create a remove to-do function, and we know that it is getting to-do ID, and in exactly the same way how we did it with create to-do, we want to create a helper to remove a to-do. So here I want to write to-dos equal helpers dot remove to-do, and inside we must provide our array of to-dos and to-do ID that we want to remove. And after this, obviously we need to call our render function. So what we're doing here, we added a click event for our remove button. We're calling remove to do, providing inside our unique to do ID, and it calls remove to do, returns for us a whole new array of to dos. After this, we're calling our render. So let's create this remove to do function inside our helpers. So here is our remove to do, and we know that we're getting a list of to dos and to do ID to remove. So what we want to return here is just a filtered array where we don't have this specific ID. So let's filter and get access to every single to-do. And now we're checking that to-do ID should not equal to-do ID that we provided. So we're leaving all elements except of this one. Let's have a look if it's working. I'm reloading the page, I'm creating a to-do. Here we're clicking on cross, and as you can see, this to-do is not there. How it happened? We had a click event. We called this function, we updated our list of to-dos, and we called render. As inside render we don't have any to-dos, we completely cleaned our screen. The next feature that we need is toggling of our to-do. So here on the left we can click on the button to toggle our to-do, but as you can see this is just HTML, it does not change anything. So what we want to do here, we want to attach one more event inside this function. So here we have node, and we're looking for the class toggle. It is also a click event, and here we want to toggle our to-do also by to-do ID. And again, our toggle to-do will be the same like remove to-do. So here let's create a function. It is toggle to-do. We're getting here to-do ID, and we have inside our helper a toggle to-do function which must return for us an updated array of to-dos. But here is the problem, it is a little bit more complicated to write it in an immutable way. So I want to create here a function toggle to do, and we're getting here a list of our to-dos and a to-do ID. So the idea is to map through every single to-do and update only the to-do with this to-do ID. This is why here we can return our to-dos map. We're getting access to our to-do, and we're checking if our to-do.id equals to-do ID, then we do our logic. In other case, we simply return a to-do. So return to-do means that we're not updating any other to-do than this one. And for specific this one, we want to override the whole object. Here we're returning the new object, where we're spreading all fields of the to-do, and we're overriding is completed by toggling it, so it will equal to-do.isCompleted with an exclamation mark. So this code will update for us a to-do and toggle it in the state. Let's have a look. I'm reloading the page, creating a to-do, I am clicking on it, and as you can see, everything was re-rendered. First of all, it is marked as done. Secondly, we are getting 0 items left. And here in the completed list now we see this item, and in active we don't. The next feature that we want to implement is toggle all. This is this button on the top. When we're clicking on it, we must toggle all our elements to another state. How can we do that? First of all, we must go inside our index.js, and here on the top inside at listeners, we want to create a new listener for our element toggle all. So here we want to add our event listener, click, and we're getting inside an event, and we just want to call a function toggle all, where inside we're providing our event target checked. So we need to know a state of our checkbox. Now what I want to do, I want to create our toggle all function, which will be super similar to, for example, toggle to do. Inside we're getting the state, it is checked, and the function name should be toggle all. And what it does, it obviously calls our helper and provides inside to-dos and checked. And we must get back an array of our to-dos. Now let's jump to our helpers and create toggle all function. It will be easier than toggle to do. So here is toggle all. We know that we're getting our array of to-dos and is completed, because essentially checked means that it is either complete all to-dos or marked all as not completed. So we want to map through the whole list of our to-dos. So to-dos map, we're getting access to every single to-do. And now we just want to return the new to-do. So for every single to-do, we're overriding is completed property to the value that we provided here. So we're essentially updating the whole array. Let's have a look. I'm creating here two to-dos. I'm clicking toggle all, and all of them are toggled. I'm clicking again, and they are not completed. And the last feature that we're missing is editing of our to-dos. So first of all, we must implement start editing, and this is a double click on our DOM node. This is why here inside our create node, we can copy paste the toggle function, for example, and change our class to label, because this is on what we're clicking and without a dot. And here we don't need a click, but a double click. And the function should be start editing, where inside we're providing our node, which essentially means we're providing the DOM node, and we will use it to understand how we need to change it. Let's create now this start editing function here, and we're getting inside node. So what we want to do, we want to add a new class to our node. So node.classListAdd, and here will be a class editing. And this is not all, I also want to focus on the input of this node when we enabled editing. So we're looking for our input, it is a class edit.focus. And this is enough to focus on this field. Let's have a look. I'm reloading the page, typing something. Here is our element, I'm double clicking, and as you can see this field is in focus because we wrote this code and activated editing. So our editing is activated. Now we must implement enter for this input in order to submit changing of this to-do. And again, in order to do that, we must create here one more helper for enter. So inside our node, we want to find a class edit. This is our input. And we want to handle here keyUp event. And we won't even create an additional function. Let's just write it in line. We need access to our event. And here we're checking, just like previously, if our event.key equals enter, then we want to update to-do. So I want to create a function update to-do, provide inside to-do ID that we want to update, but also text, and it will be event.target.value. This is what we provided in the input, and this is what item we need to update. But this is not all, we also have another condition. If our event key equals escape, then we need to close editing. So here I want to write event.target.value equals to-do title, which actually means I reverted our input. And after this, I just call render, which essentially will just close editing state, because our render never renders editing state. So now the only thing that we're missing is this update to do. Let's create it now. It will be super similar to any of the other functions. Let's name it update to do. And we're getting here our to-do ID and the text that we wrote inside. And sure, it will be a helper update to do, where inside we're providing to-dos, then to-do ID and our text. And this function must update for us a specific to-do in the list. And now I want to fully copy toggle to do function because it is super similar. Let's name it update to do. We're getting here our list of to-dos, also to-do ID and new text that we want to provide inside. We're looping through all our to-dos. If it is not our to-do, we just return it. In other case here, we're updating text, and inside we're providing a new text from the outside. So this is how we're updating our to-do. Let's check if it's working. I'm typing something here. This is our to-do. Double click, we can edit it, hit enter, and as you can see, our element was updated because our state was re-rendered. So as you can see, implementing the JavaScript project without any frameworks makes a lot of sense because it brings for you understanding how it is done inside frameworks and how you can implement it without these frameworks. And actually, if you are not sure that you have a good resume to find a job and you want to improve it, I already made a video where I converted junior level CV to advanced level so you can find the job easier. Don't forget to check it in this video.